Hey everyone, and welcome back to Vertical Blocks, where today we have the pleasure to be joined by Ganesh Swami from Covalent. So thanks, Ganesh, for joining us. We've also got Michael Kong, CEO of the Phantom Foundation. Right before we started talking here, Ganesh, we were sort of discussing your broader philosophy about how to approach looking at metrics and analyzing data when it comes to Web3 and some of the important things that people should look out for. So I think that would be a good place to start. But before we even do that, maybe you could share with us a high-level overview of what Covalent is exactly for those users or listeners that may not be so familiar with it.
Absolutely. So Covalent is a data provider for the blockchain space. So what we've done is we've scraped all on-chain data across 50 different blockchains, normalized and canonicalized them, and then offer that data via a couple of products. One of our popular and flagship products is the unified API, where developers go in and pull on-chain data from all these supported blockchains and build really interesting, compelling end-user experiences like wallets and NFT galleries and taxation tools. So that's Covalent in a nutshell. Covalent comes from the word covalent bonds in chemistry. I will leave it to a surprise whether this is a chemistry lesson or a blockchain data podcast. So that's Covalent.
Love it. That's a great introduction. We've certainly done tons of Twitter spaces and talks with a lot of the different teams that leverage Covalent as part of their infrastructure. And one of the things I find most interesting is that now that we've definitely been in a bit of a market lull for a while, the most important conversations we've been having here at the Phantom Foundation are really with infrastructure providers, setting up the base upon which everything else will be built once things pick up again and continue with the sort of euphoria that we've seen many times in the past. So that being said, Michael, I know that you're also a data guy, and these are the sorts of things you like to discuss and spend a lot of time thinking about. I guess what kinds of questions would you pose to Ganesh?
Well, Covalent has been a great data provider for the Phantom network and for users of the Phantom network since very early on. I think Covalent has integrated with Phantom for maybe 2 years now, or almost 2 years, and they've been able to provide a lot of data that's very easy to parse. So if you want to talk about data generally, I mean, what are people looking for? People first of all look for large amounts of data, right? So if there's only a few insights into a particular chain, that's already helpful. If you have large quantities of data, that's usually better than having smaller quantities of data in general. But there's also the quality of the data, how easy it is to parse. As people who have explored data before, if the data is messy, if the data is unstructured, then it's kind of a big pain in order to go through it. So what a service like Covalent does is that it structures it very straightforwardly in what's known as kind of a REST-based system. So it's key value pair. It's easy to query using very standard languages that we're aware of, like SQL, which is a very normal relational database language. And so having the data in the right structure is very important for people to basically just easily take into the applications in a very fast manner. So different metrics that people look at, I mean, if you're looking at the chain as a whole, it comes down to things like daily average transactions, the block times, or the time to finality, i.e. how long does it take to actually confirm a transaction on the network. It comes down to the number of actual validators on the network, processing transactions. It comes down to how many transactions are there included into a block, and also transaction fees, and within transactions themselves, what sort of contracts they interacted with, and that's a very important point going into what's known as TX tracing or transaction tracing. So what Covalent does is that is an external company or entity that basically transforms all of that raw blockchain data into something that is a lot more readable, and can be readable for end users in a much faster way than if you were to just read the blockchain data itself, which is somewhat structured, but a lot of it's unstructured. And so if you can transform that unstructured data into structured data, then that's a real value add in terms of being able to analyze data.
How's that sound, Ganesh? I think you put it pretty succinctly, right?
I'm just gonna say, wow, Michael, you should come join Covalent.
I generally know things at a bit of a high level. You know, then if there's anything super technical, I always say that's the rest of the team's problem, right?
No, that's exactly it. I think there's a couple of important notes in what Michael suggested. The uniformity, the ease of use is one of our core pillars. And we come from an enterprise background. In an enterprise, they're never going to retrain or retool or reprocess their internal systems. You always have a COBOL system in the backend from the 60s that continues to be humming along. So here, Covalent, the analogy is this bind or this bond between centralized and decentralized systems, databases and blockchains. So you're just being that enablement or that stepping stone for traditional companies to adopt these decentralized technologies. So that's exactly it. It's we want to make it like super simple for people to consume blockchain data.
Yeah, that's certainly a link that I'd like to explore a little later in this conversation. I know you've talked a lot about Web 2 moving into Web 3 and that sort of relationship between teams that are database focused and that's what they know, and teams that are trying to make sense of, you know, what's going on in the blockchain. How can we read this information? How can we decipher it and make intelligent decisions based on the data it presents? But before we even go there, you know, you mentioned right before we recorded here that you know, you adhere to the multi-chain thesis, and as part of that, you know, data, of course, forms it takes precedence in terms of making decisions and understanding what you're looking at and why. So maybe you could share with us your sort of overall vision of what are the important sorts of metrics and the information really that you're looking for when you're analyzing a blockchain and trying to come to conclusions.
Absolutely, and this is going back to our founding, right? Covalent. And my experience comes from the database world. In the database world, there's literally over 800 databases today. There's a website called dbdb.io. So databases, it's a database of databases, and it has 800 entries on there. The world is diverse. You have key value stores, you have graph databases, you have time series databases, you have relational databases, you have like analytical databases, you have like hierarchical databases. People are not the same. The world is diverse. The use cases are diverse. You can never have a one size fits all. There'll be one, commodity kind of database that kind of caters to majority of the use cases. But for specialized use cases, you need to use a specialized tool, right? You can't just have a single hammer and treat everything as a nail. And blockchains are exactly the same, right? So if you think of the finality, the security as a spectrum, you're going to have all the way from super expensive, like a layer one like Phantom or a layer one like Ethereum. And then you're going to have a cascade of lower security requirements for different use cases. So maybe it is for NFTs, maybe it is for gaming, maybe it is for just for database use cases. Maybe it's a ZK rollup for privately PII information. So that is the thesis that I have long believed since the founding of Covalent about 4 years ago. And that multi-chain thesis started to become true in 2020. So it was never just Bitcoin and Ethereum, but it's Bitcoin and Ethereum and this long tail of use cases. Now what is happening is the app chain thesis is just exploding on the scene. So just looking at maybe the Covalent indexing story, just looking at the counts, in 2020, we had just Ethereum indexed. One of our first blockchains was Phantom. So that in 2021, I think we added about 10 or 15 new blockchains. Today, we index 50 blockchains. Last quarter, we indexed 14 new blockchains. These are brand new bespoke blockchains for different use cases, right? So the multi-chain thesis is a must because people are diverse and use cases are diverse. Anyone who doesn't believe that just needs to look at the database world, which is a much more mature industry. And there's, like I said, 800 plus databases for different use cases.
Well said. I mean, when you're looking at different blockchains, right, as you said, it's a very competitive space. A lot of things that I think people are trying to make sense of, especially in the marketing world within blockchain, is what kind of metrics are we looking at relative to traditional software as a service company, right? SaaS, where we're thinking about user acquisition, we're thinking about retention, we're thinking about reach. But of course, in an identity-based system, like whether that's mobile applications or something else, attribution and those sorts of things are easier, right? And it's also easier to understand what initiative drove what results. Whereas with blockchain, sometimes it's a little more murky, despite the fact that those breadcrumbs are on the blockchain for you to make sense of. So when we're thinking about a blockchain protocol's adoption, its reach, its engagement and retention, how should we be thinking about these models relative to Web 2?
So it's a great question, and it's the focus of our Data Alchemist program, which I'll expand on later in this podcast. So the traditional world, it doesn't matter if it's Web 1, Web 2, or Web 3. There's the three horsemen of business analysis, and that is the three R's: reach, retention, revenue. These are the things that matter. It doesn't matter if you're in pharmaceuticals or you're in SaaS or consumption-based business or gaming, it doesn't matter, or blockchains or blockchain protocols or application layer, it doesn't really matter. So the three prongs are reach is the number of users, right? Retention is how sticky these users are, and revenue is how monetizable these users are. And this is almost like the trilemma, right? So you can have two out of the three. So let's take gaming, for example. If you take a casual game like Candy Crush, that it makes over $500 million last I checked, so it's a massive success. The reach is big, but the revenue is on a per user a lot lower. So the ARPU, average revenue per user, is lower for Candy Crush because the reach is higher, as opposed to any hardcore game like the ones from Machine Zone, for example. These are hardcore MMORPG. The reach is lower, the retention is higher, the ARPU is a lot higher. So this trilemma, you have a little cursor that you can go towards the reach, you can go towards the retention, you can go towards the thing, but you can never have all three of them. So that's really how you categorize different businesses and what is their potential in terms of cash flows or any kind of like stickiness in the business. So you can apply the same lens to blockchains. So what is the reach? The reach is number of wallets, right? And the reach can be new wallets, existing wallets, returning user wallets, and so on, transacting wallets, and so on. The revenue would be a variety of factors, like the contracts or the wallets that pay the most gas, or the ones that consume the most gas and burn the most gas. So that's also super interesting if you have like a burn mechanism within your blockchain. And then retention is the stickiness of these wallets. And so now you can categorize all of the use cases on your layer 1 or layer 2 or sidechain based on the reach, retention, revenue framework. And then you can never have the same programs to increase reach or increase retention for these different categories of applications. And just like how your mortgage application is not something you'd use every day, right? But let's say Netflix is probably something you use every day. So you can use the same kind of analogies on how do you categorize gaming applications, NFT applications and DeFi applications and stable coins and other kinds of use cases. So that's a broadly applicable framework for business analysis.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to see how there's so much crossover while it's still being a completely different field in a sense, where you are not looking at necessarily, for example, always daily active users, monthly active users, and the campaigns that drove them, but rather things like, did this user mint a token? How long did this user hold an NFT for? Those sorts of things. Maybe you could share some other examples of where a data analyst in Web 2 might come into Web 3 and say, this is a parallel or almost like the Web3 analogy to what they'd be looking at in Web2, because I think that's something that's so new. It's something a lot of people are spending time thinking about and trying to make sense of when all these definitions are still so murky.
Yeah, so let's go back to the gaming example, right? And in the gaming example, these studios are actually managing a portfolio of games. And so they're managing console games, mobile games, and blockchain games, for example, right? I'm talking specifically about this new wave of AAA, AA studios moving to the blockchain. So there, they need a spreadsheet that manages the different revenue lines and the stickiness of that revenue. So they need, just like how we have the unified data model, they need a unified business metrics framework to analyze reach, retention, revenue, so that they can do overall portfolio optimization. Otherwise, if the metrics, like, let's say, for example, I don't know, finality, does that matter to a business? Not really from a portfolio approach, right? It matters for other reasons, but not from managing the portfolio of your investments. And I'm treating, like, let's say, a gaming studio having the resources and the content on mobile and console and blockchain as revenue streams or departments. So I think it's very important to normalize and standardize these business metrics, because that's how I think the broader investor class will understand this new asset class. Otherwise, if they use any kind of like bespoke custom metrics, I think it leads to a lack of transparency, which reduces investor confidence.
Yeah, I mean, GameFi is definitely an interesting crossover there, because there are so many parallels that are also directly applicable, where it's really just the underlying technology that makes it different. Michael, I don't know if you had some thoughts you want to share on GameFi and how there might be some crossover here with what's happening on Phantom.
Yeah, I mean, like, the way I see GameFi is that I think there's generally some confusion out there where people think, oh, gaming blockchain means that you're putting like all the functionality of the game onto the blockchain. That's actually not true. What you're putting on the blockchain usually is basically saving like changes of state. In other words, using the blockchain as sort of like the data saving point for all persistent data that you want in the game. So, for example, if you're playing like an RPG game, you create a game that runs on the server and basically has all these like animations and other characteristics, and that isn't on the blockchain itself, right? That doesn't make sense, because the blockchain is like a database. And so, but whenever you make changes to a particular environment, or say like your character in my RPG example, like you acquire an item or the attributes go higher, all that data needs to be saved into the blockchain in order to keep a persistent record of the changes to your character, right? And your character is essentially a non-fungible token, or an NFT, which gets upgraded over time. And because the blockchain has full order capability from the very first transaction to most recent transaction, you can see all the data change and progress for the character, including its most recent progression. And so what this means is that it's a lot of data, right? It's a lot of data that you can pass through, that you can analyze, that you can generate results out of. And so what like a technology like Covalent does is it's a natural use case for them, because like they have done with other use cases such as DeFi, they're basically like taking all that raw data, all that history, all that audit trail, and packaging it up and allowing users to easily like see that data and visualize it and use it for like applications they want to use it for. So what like the database does is allow you to store this data in an immutable fashion that gives you that full audit trail. And what Covalent as like a third party does is allows you to interpret that information that can be very, very useful for anyone who wants to analyze exactly what is going on in the game. And this is like a key difference from, say, like a centralized database that like a game data is like saved on. I mean, I remember like back in the day when I World of Warcraft, and this was like quite a few years ago, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, there were often issues with database rollbacks where you'll be playing the game and then suddenly you get reset to your position as you were like half an hour ago, because there was some issue with the data processing that meant that the database automatically did like a rollback in order to fix some sort of issue that was going on, right? Well, with blockchain-based games, because the data is consistently being saved onto the database, being saved onto the blockchain, there's no possibility of there being some sort of like sudden rollback where suddenly your progress is lost and like as if like the past like half an hour like never occurred. You have a lot more persistent data, and you know when that rollback occurred in, let's say, World of Warcraft, there was no history or record of like what happened in the past half an hour to the beginning of the rollback. Whereas like for the blockchain technology, you have that whole history the whole way through, no matter what. And so these are some of like the advantages that games using blockchain technology can take advantage of, as well as like many others in terms of auditability and being able to trade NFTs and create a P2P marketplace and having full ownership of your digital items. So there's kind of like a practical reason why a game would maybe want to choose blockchain as sort of its like database, so to speak, rather than setting up a database separately.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually Vitalik who once had his World of Warcraft character, I think, deleted or rolled back long enough that it drove him to want to move to this new model, and that was part of the impetus there. So it's been a long time coming. I was going to ask you, Ganesh, going back to stickiness, right? And let's think about stickiness here more in the context of DeFi than GameFi, where a lot of the metrics may be similar to Web2 mobile gaming apps, for example, where it's daily active users could just be the user, open the game, and click 3 different screens, and a lot of those metrics are, let's say, they can be made to show the output you want to display. Whereas with something like liquidity provisioning, there's something much more tangible at stake, right? Which is real money for users and investors and institutions. That being said, there's a lot of other criteria that goes into why liquidity may stick around in a certain place for a certain amount of time, right? Whether that's incentive, sustainable or unsustainable, whether that's other mechanics at play in the tokenomics of said protocol. How can we think about stickiness in a sort of cohesive, all-encompassing manner?
It's a great question. So I think generally financial products are quite sticky in the sense that once you open up your mortgage or you get an insurance application, you live with that vendor for years. Now, blockchain, at least this class of DeFi protocols, are a little different because of the liquidity mining initiatives that are going on. So my hunch is that the liquidity is not actually that sticky, and which is exactly what you see. I think it was SushiSwap that did that initial vampire attack on Uniswap, and all the liquidity migrated off Uniswap onto SushiSwap. And then once those liquidity incentives were dried up, the liquidity just moved back. So I would say, Uniswap is more sticky than SushiSwap, right, from a liquidity perspective. So when you come down to how to understand liquidity, or even revenue for that matter, you definitely have to have a discount factor for external factors. And I think in the broader market outside of DeFi, just look at the macro right now. We've lived in a zero interest environment for over a decade. So in many cases, I would say valuations and pricing of assets are completely disconnected from the real world, because you don't even know what something truly costs, because the cost of capital is zero, essentially zero, right? It has been zero for a decade. So now, these assets and, these public stock market prices, they're all in that price discovery kind of engine. So I would say it's a similar thing happening in the blockchain world, where we're going through this rebalancing or, price discovery mechanism, because the liquidity initiatives have dried up. And usually the liquidity incentives are printed in the same token, right? Which is internet magic money. There's no real dollar figure behind. And so it's all mostly like speculative value. And I'm not discounting the value of speculation. Speculations are critical to explore the frontiers of what's possible. I'm a big believer in speculation. In fact, the guys who discount speculation are the TradFi guys, and for every barrel of oil that is physically moved from point A to point B, it's actually traded 25 times back and forth, right? So it's all speculative in nature. Like it's a critical part of discovering new use cases. So I would say DeFi is going through that I would say the renaissance with true utility, true stickiness, true utilization. And this is a positive thing, right? So it's like the phoenix that arises from the ashes. So I'm a POMA bull. So it doesn't matter if it's a bear market or bull market. That's just my personality type, and that's how I built Covalent. And I think what comes out of DeFi is probably going to be more akin to like a fintech DeFi merge, where you have the traditional like security guardrails and KYC and that kind of stuff, and then there's going to be all that degen, stuff which is like sandboxed. So that's my take. I think it's just too early to understand retention in an environment like this, which is what you're seeing with Peloton. That's what you're seeing with Shopify. That's what you're seeing with all these majors, right? Even Facebook, for example, right? Their stock has crashed over the past, or Snapchat, right? They're all going through we're living in a very interesting time in history, not just on the blockchain world, but also macro. So we're going through something pretty radical.
Yeah, you could say that again. I think everyone feels it in the space. But I mean, well said. Where speculation is crucial for price discovery and understanding what is overvalued relative to what is undervalued. But that can't be in and of itself the only utility or functionality of blockchain technology.
Yeah, just to add to what was said, like I definitely agree around the comments around speculation. I mean, speculation is like basically how we end up creating innovation, right? Like if you look throughout history, what is speculation? Well, basically any new technology that comes around is like very much speculative, right? And sometimes the new technology doesn't really pan out as it's supposed to be. Sometimes it pans out as it was intended to be, or even a lot better than that. And that's how you get the 100,000x, 10,000x improvement into like people's lives, and the ability for people to basically live their lives, I guess in one sense, like more efficiently, but essentially create like a higher standard of living. And I think it's the same thing for blockchain technologies. With blockchain technology, it first began as just Bitcoin, and the limitations of what you can do with Bitcoin, and now it's kind of emerged with a whole bunch of new technologies where you can create all sorts of different applications where the blockchain technology kind of makes sense as a technology solution to kind of improve the existing technology that's out there, right? So namely, like, for example, like decentralized finance, the ability for people to interact on a peer-to-peer manner, but in a secure way. And the same thing with GameFi, where basically you can take control of your data. The blockchain basically has like a lot of defense mechanisms out there to kind of protect like the data, so you don't get the drawbacks, as I mentioned before. And you have like the full audit trail and the ability to analyze the data a lot more easily than say in the past, and it's like open and transparent, so people know like what they own, and people know like what data is being transferred across the network. So I think like going forward, what we're going to see like a lot more transactions done by a lot more people in the network. I think like the blockchain technology is kind of like the early days of the internet, and I know that's been said a lot, but I think the analogy is true. Like if you look at like the way that TV hosts and individuals in the media talked about internet technologies in the very early day of the early 1990s, after Al Gore invented the internet, it was going around and telling people about like information superhighways and about browser and that sort of thing, and people would go and look at the internet and the browser and think it was all very complicated and very exotic. Well, now it's become like very mainstream in people's lives, where the vast majority of the human population use the internet in some form on a daily basis. And I think for blockchain technologies, it's going to follow a similar path, in that right now it's still kind of seen a bit exotic and weird, but over time user growth has been growing every single year, even during markets where even during markets where crypto prices have gone down, users have gone up. Like more people use blockchain technology in 2018 than they did in 2017, and a lot of people were surprised when they hear that, because they're like, oh, wait a second, but like in the media we heard that like, oh, it was all just a bubble, it was all just kind of a fad, it was all Beanie Babies, and now it's gone. It's gone down a lot, and basically like the hype is out because it wasn't really built on anything. Well, it actually is built on something. It's built on something fundamental and real technology that can solve a lot of use cases and problems that are out there. So I think over a long period of time, I see no reason why, as the technology develops, as network effects take place, as more people know about blockchain technology, and as the user experience improves, why blockchain technologies can't be a substantial part of the internet, or the same number of users use the internet. I can't see why they would not want to use blockchain technology in the end, so long as it would continue along the path that we have been continuing on for basically only the past like 12 years or so.
Yeah, it's interesting to see even with a lull in the market, and a lull is I think understating it. The engagement that people still have with blockchains and the amount that they continue to use them and the transaction count staying high across the board. What I wanted to ask you, Ganesh, is you were saying you're a permabull, and that's how you built Covalent. I wanted to talk about the sort of monetization structure for a company that's sort of crossing that chasm between Web 2 and Web 3, for example, providing data analytics infrastructure to maybe an enterprise company coming into Web 3, right? There's, of course, the annual recurring revenue sort of enterprise plans that exist in the SaaS world. But that's not always the case, especially when we come into Web 3 and different players, especially those catering to the enterprise, start to explore the different avenues. You mentioned once that you thought that this sort of data should be free and open to all, and that you didn't want to have these barriers to entry. But of course, there's at the end of the day, there's a team that you've hired, and there's people working on this product, and it has to be monetized somehow. So how do you think about that? Where's that middle ground, and how does value accrue back to the company to continue investing in research and development?
So I'm playing the long game here, right? For this to play out, it's going to take potentially a decade, if not longer. So if you look at the initiatives and how we've positioned Covalent, it's a community-driven project. So I'll take an example of how this comes into the picture. So the Data Alchemist program is our data bootcamp, and the magic here is that we are going to pay people $2,000 to complete the bootcamp, and this is probably one of the best on-chain data bootcamps that's out there for 4 weeks. It actually starts tomorrow, and we thought we'll get 100 applicants because it's I'm putting this in air quotes, bear market, right? There's not a lot of interest. What ended up happening is over 1,200 people signed up for this program, and it's not just clicking yes, I'm in. It's people submitting their resumes and recording a 1-minute video on why they're qualified to be part of this bootcamp, right? So that smashed all of our internal metrics. We only had room for 15 people, and we wanted to keep this small and think it'll be like an intimate kind of thing. But what ended up happening is, it's not going to be 15, it's going to be 250. So 250 people are now going to be trained and are going to be paid to go through this program and learn about on-chain analysis, learn about the 3 R's, the reach, retention, revenue framework, learn about on-chain data, learn about Covalent's products. And then what do you think will happen in a year? A lot of these guys will move to Web3, or they work at existing Web3, and they'll take Covalent with them, and they'll sign up for a higher product. So in a long twisted way, this is probably a really, really cheap way of customer acquisition, while also benefiting the entire crypto space. So that's how we're thinking about it, because we have no timeline on return on capital or anything of that, right? We are long-term players, and this is how we've been building Covalent since day one. So with that as a lens, there is always an enterprise need for what is known as CYA. So cover your ass, right? There's always someone. There's this phrase: "No one got fired for buying IBM," right? So there's always a need for someone to go through the meat grinder known as the procurement department. There's always someone who needs to be accountable on the other side of a service level agreement, right? There always is someone who needs to go through the legal. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through before you can engage an enterprise in a commercial setting, right? And all of that costs resources, and an enterprise on the other side is willing to pay for it. We see that ourselves. Like, we started with a small payroll provider. As our team grew, as our needs grew, as our audit requirements grew, this small payroll vendor was not able to suffice for our needs. So we had to upgrade to a higher tier. So blockchain data will always be free. It'll always be accessible. Dozens and dozens of vendors out there that are providing interesting twists on data, which is great to get started. I'm very thankful for all of the other vendors. But eventually, when you want to get serious about the data, you want to do your due diligence and you want to ensure that the structure, the corporate governance, the business practices are up to the norms, that's when you need a commercial offering. And that's not really changed from the open source model. So the way we've structured Covalent is there's a public goods entity, which is the Covalent network, which is the decentralized protocol, which is the proof-based validity data pipeline, which is very unique in its nature. And it's only possible because of the decentralized protocol. So the Covalent data today is actually exported by 15 independent operators across the globe. So there's a cryptographic proof that is submitted along with every action. So the data is cryptographically secure. And then there's a couple of products that are coming down the pipe, right? So it's like the initial refinery in an oil field. And then you have, face cream, and then paint, and then naphthalene and diesel and so on, right? The various defined products. So that's where you hit different segments, and you hit different kind of requirements. This is not very different from any kind of open source product. So if you think MongoDB, the open source database, with MongoDB, the company, or Confluent. Confluent has this data pipeline called Kafka, which is open source, free to get started. Anyone can use it. But if you want a commercial offering, then you go to Confluent, the company. And these are not small businesses. Confluent is over $100 million in revenue. That's growing over 50% year on year, right? So there are massive expansion there. Same thing with Elasticsearch. So it's big in the database world. And I think we want to be the first to be this 1-2 punch of having this public goods, cryptographically secure blockchain data with a commercial offering. And one does not work without the other. And that's why it's the 1-2 punch.
When we're talking about acquiring users, obviously it's very different if a protocol is geared towards retail versus being a software service provider for other institutions and enterprises. But when we are thinking about more of a B2C type approach, what are some of the user acquisition methods that you've seen in the data to be efficient and drive results versus some of the others where people may be spinning their wheels?
It's a very interesting question. And I'm not sure if I'm capable of answering that question, because my belief is on the application layer, the apps haven't crossed the chasm. So the customer acquisition that you do for these early adopters, if you're familiar with Christensen's market structure definition, you have the innovators, and then you have the early adopters, and then you have the early majority, and you need to cross the chasm. And most products don't cross the chasm, right? It gets stuck in that early adopters scheme. So even for Covalent, as we move from the early adopters to the early majority, we need to get a SOC 2 compliance. We need to get audit trails. We need to get role-based access control. We need to enable all of those enterprise level features. Otherwise, the buyers there, they ask for ROI calculators, and they ask for it's a different buyer persona. And the same customer acquisition tactics don't work for the two audiences. So for the early majority, what happens is that or the early adopters, what happens is they want to do something novel. They want to play with something unique. They want to be the first in line to try some new product, right? So here, I think, airdrops is exciting. Lots of new things Grim had some really interesting, acquisition channels. But when you get to the early majority, those things they don't really care about the glitter, for a lack of better word. They care about actual substance. They care about actual utility. They're potentially working at companies, and they want to hire a tool to solve their problem. So it's a different kind of acquisition model for the two sides of the chasm. So in our side, our audience is entirely developers. It's a developer tool. So for the early majority, it's the hackathons. We do 4 or 5 hackathons every month, very, very active on the hackathon scene. Covalent itself started at a hackathon. That's where you get the new ideas. You can see the future. You have front row seat to what can be possible. And some of the stuff that's being built with Covalent, I can't even explain what that is, because it's so into the future, right? It's incredible to see these innovators really, really building stuff. But what's interesting is that now, more of the enterprises, more of the mature companies that are entering the space, the Web 2 giants that are entering the space, are looking at these innovators for inspiration and then they build that and then take it to their existing hundreds of millions of users. So that's what's happening here. So there's a different tactic to acquire the early majority, kind of persona who, they're looking to build a product, but they need a calculator for their investment, right? They need like a business value, proposal, and they need to go through approvals and so on. So the two kinds are very different. It's very hard to monetize the innovators kind of like persona. They're there just to have fun. They're at hackathons, just having fun. That's fine. It's great. They push the limits of what's possible with their technology. And then you have the early majority that are adopting your product but need more guardrails. And so the customer acquisition is different. So hackathon on that side, we've been very successful with hardcore white papers. So traditional demand gen that works in a traditional Web 2 world. So there we wrote a pretty comprehensive GameFi book earlier this year. It's 80 pages, chock full of charts and data. We analyzed, again, the reach retention revenue framework that was introduced in that ebook. And that's one of the best kind of blockchain gaming data books. And that got like thousands of downloads. And, we got hundreds of GameFi projects coming on Covalent because of that book. So just, traditional tactics book. And crypto specifically is very famous for its parties. And so we throw those parties too, and we end up getting a lot of enterprise contacts, at least, awareness amongst the enterprise crowd.
Yeah, it's an interesting balancing act because, for example, at the Phantom Foundation, we're kind of catering to all of those audiences, right? On one hand, we have the end user setting up an individual wallet and interacting with the Phantom ecosystem. Then we have developers who, for example, now we're doing a hackathon with Morales and Google Cloud, where we're appealing to those developers with incentives to build on Phantom. And then we also have, of course, the more traditional enterprise type business development going on with a team that focuses on that, where it's a completely different buyer persona with a completely different process. And it's understanding how to appeal to each one of those different kinds of target audiences with a message that they can relate to. I wanted to ask you about the sort of the direction in which things are going. So you mentioned innovators come, they build a cool prototype. Web 2 giants come, they see it, they take it, and they deliver it to their existing audience, which is massive in reach. I think what a lot of Web 3 builders who are native Web 3 builders might be thinking is with something where it's open source, interoperable, forkable, composable, where the barrier to really just creating a straight replica with just a different twist in branding is really no barrier at all. They're thinking, well, how can we create a moat, a competitive economic moat, so that when our product starts to gain traction and adoption, and we have these native Web3 users using it, we don't immediately lose to a giant enterprise coming from Web2, taking the model and delivering it, right? So what are some of the ways that these builders can start to think about, again, building that moat and retaining some of that value in that user base in their product?
Yeah, so I would say, it comes, the only defensible asset in a business is brand. Honestly, that's just my opinion. The technology gets commoditized with time. The enterprise contracts and so on leads to a very icky kind of relationship with the enterprise with time, which is the case with Oracle and so on. And so I would say brand is the only thing that matters, brand and packaging, which goes hand in hand. And just take water, for example. Water from the tap is free, but if I bottle it up, that's $2. If I add some fizzy water, that's $5, right? It's water. And blockchain data is free on Etherscan. And then you package that, you can use it for free at Covalent, and then just pay with your time. And then you pay like tens of thousands of dollars for Covalent the enterprise. So I think fundamentally it's the service delivery and the brand that matters. You see that all over, like Coinbase. Coinbase is, I think it's 30 bips, while Binance is 1/10 that. How is Coinbase allowed to charge 10 times the price of what Binance or even the Coinbase Pro charges, right? So it's branding, it's trust, it's all those things. Those things never move away. So given the ocean of choices today, if Phantom or if a builder wants to stand out, even Covalent wants to stand out, it's standing for your values, showing that you're best in class and you have the customer's objective at heart and being customer centric, that never goes out of favor. Just like how making money and making revenue never goes out of favor, right? Never goes out of fashion. So that's the only way. Otherwise, everything is open source. Everything is it's difficult to it's almost commoditized on the infra layer, which is what it should be, right? Which is exactly how it should be. But it's the value-added service, the service delivery, which sits at top, where a lot of the value accrual happens.
Well, because I think blockchain technologies are generally open source. I agree a lot with what's being said at the moment. I think in terms of competitive mode, it really comes down to kind of two things. It comes down to first mover advantage on the new technology that you've created, and having the network effects, right? So just take, for example, Ethereum, right? Ethereum's technology is open source. Anyone can look at the code base. Anyone can run their own implementation of Ethereum and run their own smart contracts on that implementation. But Ethereum is still the most popular smart contract network out there, right? By many different metrics, right? And why is that the case? Well, it is of course, the case that you can take technology from Ethereum, whether it's the whole chain or whether it's just part of technology, and integrate that into other technology stacks, right? In fact, that's exactly what we've done at Phantom, right? We've connected the smart contract engine known as the Ethereum virtual machine, plus the Solidity programming language and a whole bunch of other tools directly from Ethereum, and put it on top of a new consensus engine, right? As have other chains out there, right? But that doesn't mean that we automatically get the same number of users as Ethereum, right? Why is that the case? It's because Ethereum was the first smart contract platform out there. It got a lot of traction, and it had years advantage. It had years of advantage over other chains out there that came later. So that means that there's a strong network effect for Ethereum. A lot of people know about Ethereum. It's usually the first smart contract chain that they interact with when they're first interacting with a smart contract chain. And so because it has network effects, it's a very defensible mode. So a lot of people out there, some people who are not very familiar with open source and how open source works, sometimes they say, oh, it isn't going open source a mistake, because can't people just immediately copy your technology, and then basically you've just done all the hard work that someone else has taken advantage of, and they've done it legally because you just put the code out there. It's well, yes, people can just take what we put out there, but you can't just copy network effects, right? You can't just download network effects and then suddenly you have X number of users, whatever they might need to be. And so that is something that requires a lot of effort to achieve in terms of network effects, and that's not something that you can just simply copy. So that's really the defensible moat that's out there.
There's, well said, Michael. There's one thing I want to share the leaders and the listeners of this podcast. The relentless pursuit of innovation always wins out. Take the example of the graph versus Covalent. We started about the same time. Covalent was bootstrapped for the first couple of years. We are not in Silicon Valley. We didn't have access to those pools of capital for early stage companies. And it was also a bear market. The graph was able to close a round of funding. They really established the thought leadership and the mind share. But what happened in the past year and a half is that we have aggressively shipped product, like month after month after month after month, right? Like you look at our change log, we've not slowed down. In fact, we've increased our pace. We are increased our velocity of shipping software. And today we are the default choice for builders. We're the default choice for blockchains. We're the default choice for enterprises. So just, continually pushing that edge of innovation will break through and break free from the competition. So I think that in itself is a moat. And so that's a thought I want to leave. Like competition almost doesn't matter. It's irrelevant if you keep shipping.
Yeah, and just a final comment on competition. Competition, in like a free market gives you a better result, right? Because it's basically a race to the top. It's who can get out there with the best product, that gets the most number of users, and that's how we make progress basically as a society. And I think a lot of people miss that in the end, but competition is good.
Awesome. Competition is good. Well, Ganesh, I know you have to run, but thanks so much for joining us. This was an awesome conversation. Thanks, Michael, as well for joining. And let's do it again in the future sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks so much, guys.